He freezes at the transfer screen, convinced the situation is far beyond him, as the system gives strange starting conditions and leaves both his possessions and objective blank. He decides everything now depends on how she reacts, and believes that if he can turn this strange setup into something useful, he might still gain an advantage. As he stares at the princess's image, he bitterly concludes that people from other worlds are treated like disposable trash here, and mutters that they will regret this. With a strained grin, he addresses her as Highness while the air around her turns painfully tense. He introduces himself as Shinokahara Shinta, a 17-year-old summoned to another world to defeat the Demon Lord, then notes that all of this happened only hours ago. He realizes that people like him are called heroes in this world, as he stands before a princess flanked by armored guards. He remembers that heroes are supposed to be welcomed with cheers and admiration, so the reality before him feels deeply wrong. He learns that 3 assassination-type skills are granted at summoning and that there are 10 skill categories in total, which leaves him stunned. He is told the summoning skills are fixed from the start, while the others can be gained later through life and adventure. In the end, he understands that the 3 summoning skills given to him are categories 1, 2, and 3. As he checks the 3 summoning skills, he finds 2 of them crushingly underwhelming. People Primer only gives information on a chosen person, while Perfect Counter merely reflects attacks back at the attacker. He focuses on the 3rd skill and decides not to dwell on the 2nd one yet, reasoning that if the first can appraise people, it may still become useful. Seeing that otherworld transfer lists Japan, Tokyo, he jolts in shock and wonders how it works, then instantly clings to the possibility of going home. While the princess keeps talking in the background, he forces himself to tune her out, decides to start simple, and hesitates over testing the skill before concluding there are too many unknowns to rush. He steadies himself and concludes that the first skill at least seems simple enough to try. Even with doubts still gnawing at him, he braces himself and decides to do it. He activates his first skill, People Primer. The skill reveals that the girl is Alicia Felt Kussler, the 17-year-old second princess of the Kussler royal family, who looks down on demi-humans, beastmen, and otherworlders, and even enjoys watching non-humans suffer. As more of her profile unfolds, he is shaken to learn that she sees summoned heroes as disposable soldiers and resents them for the burden of the ritual, making him realize she was the one who summoned him. Faced with that truth, he grimly realizes he may be in far deeper trouble than he thought. Realizing the others probably share the princess's hostility, he panics and decides he needs to escape now. Even so, he admits that what he truly wants is simply to go home. The princess offers what sounds like a heartfelt apology. She then tells him with a bow that the only way for him to return home is to defeat the Demon Lord. He goes rigid and demands to know if that is really the only option. She confirms it and explains that this is simply how the summoning ritual works. As she moves close to him, she says she knows this is a lot to bear and that the shock must be overwhelming. Wearing a calm smile through it all, she urges him to relax and collect himself, making the whole exchange feel even more unsettling. She politely asks him to let her guide him, while he grows increasingly disturbed by how normal she is pretending to be. Watching her closely, he begins to suspect that her composure may be nothing but an act. He stops himself from condemning the princess too quickly and admits he still has no proof that Prime Minister Piom's information was correct. He then recalls how kindly she has treated him and wonders if his skill made her seem crueler than she truly is. As he walks with the knight, he tells himself appearances can deceive and that she is still undeniably composed, which only clouds his judgment further. Entering a furnished room, he steps inside while the princess lingers near the doorway, leaving him to quietly assess the danger. When he asks if she is leaving, the knight says he will give them privacy, and the princess calmly adds that if he needs anything, he need only ask the attendants. She explains that she must report to her father that the summoning succeeded, and after that, she will properly introduce the 2 attendants to him. He accepts the explanation and politely excuses himself. Sitting down with resolve, he decides that before anything else, he has to find out whether he can return to Japan. He right away tries to activate his 3rd skill, Otherworld Transfer, and sets himself as the target. The attempt fails instantly as the skill informs him that its use is restricted because the selected target is locked. He guesses the lock will not be lifted until he defeats the Demon Lord, and that implication leaves him deeply uneasy. The skill details still list his original world as Japan, Tokyo, with Japanese as his language and no stated restrictions, giving him one small clue to cling to. He starts to think he may still be able to return on his own, and even imagines the princess sending him away if she turned on him, though he admits that would depend on whether she really needs him. As the attendants stand nearby and he sits alone, he reminds himself that far too many questions remain unanswered. He steels himself and decides it is time to use his first skill again. He identifies the attendants as Haril Tran, a 28-year-old lady-in-waiting who resents being assigned to care for an otherworlder, and Laurent Igor, a 24-year-old young royal guard member taught that otherworlders are monsters wearing human skin. Seeing that information, he grows alarmed and starts wishing this skill might somehow be wrong after all. He then decides to use the ability to learn more about his own skills. The skill list appears, showing People Primer, Perfect Counter, and Otherworld Transfer, with the last one described as transferring a designated person to another world. He recalls that he already understands People Primer, but Perfect Counter feels almost suspiciously strong, leaving him wary as he presses on. He reviews Otherworld Transfer and notes how flexible it seems, deciding he will need plenty of trial and error to truly understand it. Even while keeping an eye on the maiden guard, he reminds himself that his skills are his only lifeline and that he cannot ignore People Primer's warning, so he stays on guard. He quietly answers with a guarded expression as someone praises him as a fine hero. He is formally led forward as the maid politely asks him to come this way. Using his ability, he identifies the man on the throne as Raster Feld Kussler, the 50-year-old king of the Kussler Kingdom, an exceptionally ordinary ruler with no special hatred for non-humans but no affection for them either. The king deeply thanks him for answering the kingdom's summons in its darkest hour and begs him to help restore peace to the realm. Haruki answers briefly, though the tension on his face gives away his uncertainty. The king then asks him to defeat the demon lord, while adding that they will not force him to depart right away. Caught off guard, he stares back in silence, as if testing whether the king truly means what he says. The king explains that a hero does not wield all of their skills from the instant of summoning. Haruki learns that they plan to train him for 3 months, and the announcement tightens something inside him. Staring ahead in surprise, he realizes that means he will be forced through training first. The king explains that an inexperienced hero rushing into battle would struggle even against weak monsters, so Haruki will be assigned a personal instructor. Haruki inwardly feels as though he has been conscripted, while outwardly being told to use this time well and prepare for the journey ahead. He cautiously asks whether someone can also teach him about this world and its customs, and the king agrees without pause. Another voice announces that training begins tomorrow and tells him to ready himself, while Haruki obediently answers that he understands. Later, Haruki sits alone in his room beneath the dim light, left with nothing but his thoughts. Sitting on the room, he bitterly admits he wants to go home, but accepts that it is not happening anytime soon and reminds himself the training starts tomorrow. He recalls being told that beings from other worlds often become terrifying monsters wearing human shape, then turns that thought back on the people of this world. A sharp look crosses Haruki's face as he quietly begins fitting the pieces together. Lying in room, Haruki tells himself he has no interest in cheerful adventures through this ruined world and decides to focus only on finding a way home. As he reviews his abilities, Haruki realizes that otherworld transfer may be his only real lifeline, and the thought stops him cold. Looking over the skill details, he halts at a target selection screen and wonders what exactly he is looking at. Haruki pieces it together and concludes that if his first and third skills are connected, then once he analyzes someone, he may be able to transport them. Seeing a detailed profile appear, he remembers that no one ever asked about his skills and wonders if they somehow already know what he has. He dismisses that idea, deciding they would have acted far more carefully if they knew, especially now that he understands what kind of Princess Alicia really is. Haruki recalls that they said heroes are summoned to defeat the demon lord, and quietly notes that at least that part sounds plausible. While studying the king and the princess, he admits there is still too much he does not understand, including what a demon lord actually is. While the princess coldly insists a hero should endure hardship before daring to complain. His thoughts harden as he decides he has to unravel the world transfer skill, and he realizes that means one thing. Sitting alone on the room, Haruki concludes that he needs a test subject, and he already knows exactly who it should be. Haruki bitterly concludes that the woman who summoned him here clearly wants to watch him suffer. He identifies that woman as Princess Alicia. Scratching his head, Haruki wonders if his first skill has been feeding him false information yet again. As he studies the screen, he notices Alicia's detailed profile under the transfer function and pauses, thrown off. Seeing her portrait appear, Haruki realizes some kind of status window has opened and begins linking the clues together. Alicia asks whether that thing is acting on its own, confirms Haruki is in his room, and orders that he be put through harsh training without restraint. Others explain that people from other worlds often grow into dangerous threats and must be handled carefully, while insisting a royal must be present to win over the Holy See, and noting that Alicia will apparently be staying with him. Alicia reacts with open disgust and says the thought of spending a month with that person makes her skin crawl. Haruki is taken aback and dryly remarks that her behavior is hardly fitting for royalty. Watching her speak, Haruki realizes she hates heroes more than anything, even as she keeps hurling scorn at him. Haruki politely excuses himself, but his uneasy expression makes it clear he is already on guard against whatever Princess Alicia is plotting. The spell changes her condition in an unexpected way. With a smug look, Alicia declares that she will keep him under control, and hence that once the Demon Lord is defeated, she intends to deal with him next. Haruki freezes as the meaning of her words lands, and he asks what she means by after the Demon Lord is defeated. Sitting on the room, Haruki admits she would almost be impressive if she were not completely unstable, then decides to sort through everything he has learned. He concludes that she only fed him the primer because she needed information from him, and once that was done, she clearly intended to make him suffer, leaving him to bitterly admit she was vicious after all. Haruki steadies himself, accepts the situation, and decides that the real game has finally begun. He resolves that his best move is to watch Alicia closely, reasoning that as she said it that openly, then he can probably trust the primer on that point. Haruki turns back to the otherworld transfer skill, realizing he needs to uncover exactly how it works. Elsewhere, Alicia appears at ease in a private room, while another woman stands nearby, creating a tense pause that sharply contrasts Haruki's rising suspicions. Haruki jolts as the screen flashes on without warning, and the sight instantly stuns him. Looking at Alicia in the bath, Haruki is shaken when the display bluntly marks her as his target through the lover function. The spell changes her condition in an unexpected way. As he stares at Alicia's image, Haruki realizes that spending months with someone he finds unbearable would turn this whole ordeal into misery. Sitting there in conflict, Haruki admits he would normally feel guilty and look away, but he reminds himself she abducted him, leaving him morally conflicted. Haruki steels himself and decides this is too serious to brush off, forcing his focus back because his survival may depend on it. Even as he tells himself he can keep using this advantage a little longer if he keeps at it, Haruki remembers he has to wake up early and cannot waste too much time. On the other side, Alicia lies in room and quietly declares the setup perfect, clearly pleased with the arrangement. Studying otherworld transfer, Haruki sees that the skill can send a designated target to another world, and he notes that the location is now listed as a comfortable empty house in Japan with a soundproof room that cannot be peeped into, making him think the ability might truly work. Haruki notices that the language, equipment, and possessions fields are still uncertain and concludes he will not know their limits unless he tests the skill himself. Haruki activates his third skill, Otherworld Transfer. A sharp ringing cuts through the room as the transfer begins around Alicia's room. Alicia stirs in her sleep, and Haruki appears before her, staring in shock at the sudden success. Alicia's body rises and drifts as the transfer takes hold, making the moment tense and unreal. The scene vanishes behind a curtain of light as the transfer completes. Seeing Alicia in the new room, Haruki blurts out in amazement that it really worked. A thump confirms her arrival, and Haruki notices that no equipment came with her. He concludes that she has been sent to another world under the exact conditions he set. Haruki recalls that the only requirement for his third skill is selecting a target. With the destination set anywhere he wants, Haruki reviews the conditions: Japan, Japanese language, no equipment, no possessions, and the objective of spending one night there. Haruki imagines that if he can target a person, he could even toss the Demon Lord to the wolves. He realizes that same targeting condition makes the skill impractical in direct combat because it needs a specific person. Even so, Haruki clings to the hope that a power linking different worlds might still help him get home. A minute passes as he waits for the result. Haruki confirms Alicia is back in her room sleeping normally, but now her original state has changed while whatever counted as equipped items stayed behind. He reasons that her clothes vanished the instant she was transferred, then stops to think it through. Checking the specifications, he sets the destination as a comfortable soundproof house in Japan, keeps the language as Japanese, changes equipment to previously worn clothes, leaves possessions as none, and sets the objective to spending 0.01 second in Japan. The scene shifts to an apartment building, marking the instant stop in Japan. Alicia reappears asleep in a room with her clothes restored, and Haruki notes with satisfaction that he got her back into them perfectly. Then Haruki suddenly pauses, sensing something about the result deserves a closer look. Haruki wonders whether he can use the skill to equip Alicia with things that do not actually exist, even something as absurd as an imaginary legendary weapon or magic item. He right away rules out using the same trick on himself, realizing that if he handed such items to someone else, and they decided they were done with him, he would be finished. Sitting down to think, Haruki decides testing the skill with weapons is too dangerous and starts considering what else it might do. He admits the side benefits are obvious, but he knows the idea carries real risks. Looking over the specifications more carefully, Haruki kills the reckless thought and tells himself he has to treat this far more seriously. Alicia remains asleep through the transfer effect, and the scene lingers on the subtle shifts in her condition and what she is wearing as the test takes hold. Studying the result, Haruki notes that Alicia really does appear with whatever he imagines, and realizes these skills are absurdly overpowered for a hero, since he can even set the disappearance limit down to the second. As he reviews the settings for language, equipment, possessions, and the objective of spending 0.01 second in Japan, he wonders whether the message field might reveal the sender's name and decides he should probably test it. Even then, Haruki stops and reminds himself that he needs to think through every possible risk first. His curiosity wins out when he notices the message reads, "Compensation for summoning a hero," and he reasons that even if the display is clumsy and anonymous, this is the first clue he has found, so he has to test it. Haruki realizes he can use the skill to pressure the princess, and the imagined scene makes the moment unsettling. The fantasy deepens as Alicia appears flustered and compliant, and Haruki thinks that if this works, he could force the princess to do what he wants. Even while admitting he is already getting carried away, Haruki tells himself he is too tired to wait until tomorrow and decides to check what the message button does first. He briefly indulges the reckless thought that before that, he could push things a little further, and the atmosphere grows increasingly inappropriate. Haruki decides that simply making her uncomfortable like this is no longer enough to satisfy his reckless curiosity and returns to his earlier idea. Looking at the equipment settings, he is shocked by how extreme the written options have become and admits even he thinks this is too much. Bracing himself, Haruki decides to go through with it and activates his skill, Otherworld Transfer. In an instant, the scene shifts to a vast nighttime cityscape in Japan. A view of apartment buildings flashes past, and Haruki reacts in stunned disbelief as he realizes the transfer actually worked. The return is abrupt, and the impact jolts the scene as Haruki lets out a startled sound. Haruki leans over Alicia again, pulled back into the moment despite everything that just happened. Alicia remains flushed and sweating in her sleep, breathing unevenly as the atmosphere stays deeply uncomfortable. Haruki notes that her face has gone completely red and that she is sweating heavily, wondering if she is somehow reacting even while asleep. He notices her eye covering has slipped and casually decides he can fix it before she wakes, brushing aside the situation. Still, Haruki grows uneasy when she shows no sign of waking, and tells himself she may simply be exhausted. As she twitches, Haruki coldly tells the sleeping princess to keep having that troubling dream. He suddenly freezes when Alicia jolts and lets out a startled sound, making it seem as though she may be responding in real time. With a calm smile, Haruki decides that is enough for today and remarks that she got off lightly for abducting him. Alicia, still dazed and sweating, weakly protests that otherworlders should not be treated as worthless and asks if that is not true, Your Highness. Turning toward the status screen, Haruki warns Alicia to watch what she does or he may think up even harsher punishments. Haruki quietly bids the sleeping princess goodnight and wishes her uneasy dreams as he slips away from the bedside. Alicia's eye suddenly flickers, and she lets out a faint strained murmur that makes the moment even more unsettling. By morning, Haruki wakes, stretches, and assumes Alicia must have passed out at some point. Looking out over the castle grounds, Haruki confirms to himself that this was no dream and that he is definitely still in another world. He turns back and is startled to see Alicia still asleep on the room, breathing unevenly and making a weak sound. Noticing her condition and what she is still wearing, Haruki harshly judges her while the atmosphere remains deeply uncomfortable. Since she never woke up even once, Haruki guesses the summoning ritual may have simply left her exhausted. Later, the king formally declares that Haruki will begin with 3 months of training. Hearing that, Haruki dryly remarks that training sounds rough, especially since endless level grinding already feels too much like a game. As he sits with the status screen open, Haruki thinks that if the people around him are actually decent, he might still be able to make the best of this. Alicia smirks and declares that having Haruki under her control would mean little unless she truly understood what kind of person he was. Lying half-conscious on the room, Alicia weakly decides that for now she will pretend to obey and carefully watch how things unfold step by step, while her strained breathing keeps the atmosphere uneasy. Haruki admits Alicia is striking at first glance, but he right away reminds himself that appearances mean nothing compared to what lies underneath. Haruki bitterly compares his situation to the usual hero stories where a summoned hero wins, saves the day, and falls in love with the princess, then rejects that fantasy as nothing like reality. With a tired sigh, Haruki checks People Primer again and sees Alicia identified as the second princess who despises non-humans, hates otherworlders, and treats summoned heroes as disposable tools. Haruki forces a casual laugh and says he will just tell Alicia to enjoy herself, adding that they are somehow alike in a twisted way. A sudden worry hits Haruki as he realizes Alicia may not simply be asleep, and he fears her condition could be serious. Growing uneasy, Haruki knocks on the door to call for help. Looking back at the room, he calls out to Princess Alicia, but she remains unresponsive as the moment turns tense. Outside the room, a maid stands before the door while Haruki urgently calls Princess Alicia's name again. Haruki suddenly realizes he was an idiot for not noticing sooner and remembers being convinced she had looked oddly worked up at least once during the night. Panicking, Haruki concludes that means she had not been acting or setting up some scheme after all. The realization slams into him, and he can only spiral deeper into alarm. Inside the room, the maid calls for Princess Alicia to get ready for the day, but Alicia only gives weak, strained sounds, making the atmosphere uneasy. Haruki imagines disaster as a superior warns that if anyone sees this, Haruki will be blamed first, and he bleakly thinks everyone already hates him and his life is over because it happened right after he was summoned. A maid at the door notices the commotion and asks whether something is wrong. Haruki awkwardly explains that Princess Alicia is not answering him, though he can hear faint sounds from inside, and the maid remarks that this is highly unusual. Haruki curses himself again and realizes he should have erased the suspicious signs earlier, because if anyone enters Alicia's room now, he feels completely finished. He considers using his skills to help Alicia somehow, but hesitates because the maids might witness everything. Standing before the door, the maid calls out to Princess Alicia and asks whether she is feeling unwell. Haruki frantically checks Alicia's status and panics, realizing he still cannot identify what is wrong or what he should do. At the door, the maid respectfully asks Princess Alicia for permission to enter, while the silence keeps the tension high. Receiving no clear reply, the maid says she is coming into the princess's chambers anyway. Haruki stiffens in shock and realizes he is already too late to stop this. Alicia appears flustered and strained, her weak reaction making the situation feel even more uneasy. The maid opens the door and steps inside without further delay. Entering the room, the maid calmly offers Princess Alicia a good morning greeting. Alicia finally responds with a composed good morning, showing she is at least conscious. The maid asks Alicia how she is feeling and whether she slept well through the night. Alicia says she did sleep, but admits she seems to have overslept somewhat. The maid says Alicia must be exhausted after the summoning ritual and treats her condition as perfectly natural. Alicia quickly agrees, clinging to that explanation like a lifeline. Then she suddenly freezes, her expression tightening with alarm. Her heart pounds as she sits stiffly, flushed and unable to calm down. Alicia fixates on the idea that this might be some kind of consequence for summoning a hero, and the thought leaves her deeply shaken. Haruki silently repeats the word consequence, stunned and at a loss for any response. Alicia tells the maid she may leave, and the maid hesitates before respectfully asking for forgiveness. Puzzled, the maid asks whether Alicia does not want help getting dressed. Alicia firmly repeats that the maid should leave at once. As the maid withdraws, Alicia hurriedly starts dressing herself while Haruki watches the situation turn even more awkward. Alicia flushes bright red and lets out a strained sound as the tension becomes unbearable. Haruki exhales in relief and thinks he would have been in serious trouble if the princess had spoken any later. Alicia reflects in distress that she endured the entire night, then bitterly wonders if she really broke down at the worst possible moment. Haruki notices the sage message did not trace back to him, guesses it does not display his name, and in his dazed state admits he cannot think straight and needs sugar. Two maids wheel in a cart and formally announce that breakfast has been served while Haruki waits across the room. As the meal is set out, Haruki offers a polite thanks, and the maid informs him that his combat training begins today. Haruki jolts in surprise, and the maid calmly tells him to finish breakfast quickly. The maid adds that he must head to the training grounds at once, leaving Haruki stunned as the door closes behind her. Alicia, still flushed and visibly drained, mutters in frustration that this situation is miserable. Haruki answers with the same exhausted frustration as he walks down the corridor toward whatever comes next. Haruki trudges along and complains that the very start of his morning nearly gave him a heart attack, then reminds himself he has to scarf down breakfast and get to training. As he moves through the corridor, Haruki bitterly wonders what he did to deserve any of this and suspects even that harsh maid is plotting something. Elsewhere, Alicia reaches for a book, searches through records, and realizes with alarm that she cannot find a single trace of what happened. Surrounded by piles of books, Alicia sees that none of the records mention anything about consequences and anxiously wonders what in the world happened to her. Haruki notices Alicia investigating the library and quietly concludes that this confirms his theory. He realizes the sage message was anonymous and that Alicia is overthinking exactly as he hoped, which leaves him strangely encouraged. At the training grounds, a stern man introduces himself as Ruid, says he will oversee Haruki's training, and identifies Haruki as the hero. Haruki replies that his name is Shinta Ohara and says it is good to meet him too, while right away sensing that this man is dangerous. As he checks the status information, Haruki sees that Ruid Clanis is a 42-year-old commander of the Royal Guard who is conspiring with the princess to monitor him and eliminate him if necessary, and Haruki is horrified that this man openly wants him dead. Ruid grabs his weapon and coldly orders Haruki to show his level right now, before training begins. Ruid casually tosses Haruki a wooden sword and suggests they start with a little sparring match, leaving Haruki thrown by the sudden shift. Before Haruki can react, Ruid praises him as a hero while instantly rushing in, and Haruki barely manages to grab the weapon in shock. Ruid closes the distance in a flash and drives his attack forward, forcing Haruki back as the impact smashes into the ground with overwhelming force. After the strike tears up the training ground, Ruid remarks that Haruki has impressive evasive moves and says he had still been holding back. Hearing that, Haruki stares in disbelief and realizes that terrifying attack was supposedly restrained. As Haruki steadies himself, he panics internally that Ruid nearly split the ground apart and fears the man somehow learned about Alicia's late-night situation and decided to kill him. Haruki quickly rejects that idea, reasoning that the princess's actions being exposed is unlikely, which only makes Ruid's hostility feel even more disturbing. Ruid taps the wooden sword against his shoulder and brings up the old rule that summoned heroes arrive with 3 skills, then says he was hoping Haruki would tell him about them. Haruki grows wary and silently questions why Ruid would ask about his skills at a moment like this. Ruid explains that the reason is partly to train Haruki more effectively. Ruid adds that he is also asking out of simple curiosity. Haruki points out that the royal family should already know these skills since he cannot be the first hero they have ever summoned, and Ruid presses him on why he assumes that. As they face each other in the training yard, Ruid explains that heroes have indeed been summoned repeatedly for more than 1,000 years. Hearing that, Haruki reasons there should be records on those earlier heroes. Ruid admits the records exist, but says they only show that heroes kept using the same skills again and again. Haruki fires back that if those records are that limited, they should use some kind of analysis magic instead of interrogating him after dragging him into this world, but Ruid says no such help exists here. Ruid states flatly that if magic like that existed, they would have used it the moment Haruki arrived. As Ruid gestures, he explains that magic in this world works differently from whatever Haruki knew before. He goes on to say that their magic was developed slowly for the sole purpose of defeating the Demon Lord, leaving them with only specialized combat magic. Haruki takes that in and reflects that, unlike the fantasy worlds he imagined, this place has no convenient analysis magic at all. Ruid rushes in and says he will explain magic later, insisting that Haruki answer about his skills first. While pressing the attack with a sweeping strike, Ruid sharply demands that Haruki tell him about those skills. Haruki panics and realizes he cannot simply reveal everything. Ruid narrows the question and asks which of Haruki's 3 skills comes first. Haruki grows even more suspicious and wonders why Ruid is forcing the issue right now. Haruki suddenly realizes this world has no way to analyze his skills, and he concludes that Ruid is attacking to trap him before he can make up a lie. As the pressure keeps building, Haruki understands that Ruid's opening attack had only been a threat. Ruid coldly asks what the problem is and mocks Haruki for being unable to answer a few questions. Another fast strike flashes past and Haruki jerks in alarm as the blade whips overhead. The spell changes her condition in an unexpected way. Ruid raises his sword and keeps the pressure on, while Haruki faces him under the threat of another attack. Cornered and sweating, Haruki decides he has to say something and finally reveals that his first skill is People Primer. Haruki hurriedly explains that People Primer gives him a simple explanation of the people he meets, choosing a partial truth just to survive the moment. Ruid pauses in surprise and bluntly asks if that is really all the skill does. Haruki snaps back that the skill is useful, saying it warns him to be careful around people like Ruid, and demanding to know what kind of explanation he even wants. As an example, Haruki points out that the skill tells him Ruid is the commander of the royal guard and the strongest man in the land. Ruid laughs and admits the part is accurate, but still cannot see how that information would be especially useful. Haruki says the point is to help him understand this unfamiliar world he was suddenly thrown into. Ruid accepts that answer for the moment and right away asks about the second skill, while Haruki inwardly panics and realizes he may have to lie again. Haruki reveals that his second skill is Divine Blessing, explaining that it lets him grant a protective blessing to someone beside him for a short time. Ruid identifies that person as Princess Alicia and says he will need to speak with her about it later. Ruid narrows his eyes and presses Haruki to explain his last skill as well. As Ruid suddenly dashes in again and tells him to think fast, Haruki nervously starts to bring up his final skill. Haruki barely dodges with a strained breathe sharply, and Ruid reminds him that this is still training. From across the training ground, Ruid orders Haruki to keep his mind clear or he will end up injured. Sweating under the pressure, Haruki realizes he cannot simply tell Ruid everything and thinks his hidden skill is his only lifeline. Ruid tightens his grip on the sword and coldly demands that Haruki stop stalling and tell him his final skill. Haruki steels himself, decides there will be no more games, and concludes he needed to test this skill eventually. As Ruid lunges with a grin and says Haruki might as well do it now, Haruki braces himself and decides this is the moment to try. The attack skids off course, Haruki staggers from the sudden clash, and Ruid turns as the exchange leaves a sharp opening between them. Haruki finally reveals that his last skill is Counter, explaining that it reflects whatever an attack does to him back at the attacker. Trying to sound casual, Haruki adds that the proper name is technically Perfect Counter, but he deliberately weakened the explanation just in case. Ruid says he has already seen enough to understand how this skill works in practice, while Haruki nervously hopes that will be enough to hide his small lie. Haruki complains that a perfect counter should have reflected everything, then realizes with alarm that he still had to take the hit for it to activate and that hardly feels useful. Clutching his injured arm, Haruki panics as the pain surges and worries that the arm might be broken. A moment later, he tells himself to wait, noticing in surprise that the pain is already starting to fade. Haruki stares at his arm in shock as the injury disappears, realizing it hurt at first but is now completely fine, and he wonders if the skill really did reflect everything after all. Ruid concludes that ordinary attacks may not work on Haruki at all, though he cautions that the hit still clearly caused pain. Sitting on the ground, Haruki uneasily thinks that this suspicious man seems to be calmly gathering information that could help him kill him, while Ruid dryly remarks that they cannot test what would happen if he actually tore Haruki's arm off. Looking down at him, Ruid says that skill is useless for combat and adds that Haruki's other abilities are just as strange, while Haruki internally fumes that this man keeps insulting his carefully chosen skills. Haruki takes a short break and lets out a weary breath before thinking about going back to training. While resting, Haruki admits he was thinking about how striking Princess Alicia is. When Ruid reacts, Haruki awkwardly explains that he only met her briefly the day before, yet he has never seen anyone as impressive as her. Ruid teases that it sounds like infatuation, and Haruki bashfully insists he may be a hero, but is still just an ordinary guy. Ruud dryly says that kind of admiration could be useful before eventually betraying Haruki, turning the mood sharply tense. Haruki forces a smile, guesses that is exactly what Ruud is thinking, and says he can go ahead and consider that a weakness if he wants. Ruud stands and announces that the break is over, warning Haruki to get ready because he will not go easy on him. Haruki glares ahead and bitterly vows that Princess Alicia will pay for this later. In the open training ground, Haruki angrily mocks himself for being called a hero at all. After getting knocked down again, Haruki groans as Ruud says 3 months will not be nearly enough to whip him into shape, and Haruki despairs that he has to endure all of this for that long. Haruki slumps into a brief rest, shaking as panic grips him that if this continues, he will collapse long before he ever reaches the Demon Lord. Frustrated and drained, Haruki questions what any of this training is even for, and bitterly thinks it is only turning him into someone harsher than he ever wanted to become. Facing Ruud, Haruki hesitantly asks whether swords would even work against the Demon Lord. Ruud instantly catches on, and bluntly confirms that Haruki is asking whether human sword techniques can work on the Demon Lord. Haruki says 3 months is nowhere near enough to raise his strength, and adds that if swordsmanship alone could bring the Demon Lord down, then Ruud should just go fight it himself. Ruud laughs and admits Haruki has a point, but says that unfortunately, he cannot. Ruud calmly explains that when a human gets too close to the Demon Lord, they die. Haruki recoils and protests that Ruud cannot say something like that so casually, because they are still talking about human lives. With a dismissive wave, Ruud warns that if the Demon Lord turns its mana on someone, that person is finished. Haruki listens in stunned silence as Ruud explains that no matter how strong someone is, there is no defense against the Demon Lord's magic, a phenomenon people call by a specific name. Ruud explains that the Demon Lord uses instant death magic, then casually adds that it is apparently a plant that regrows every 100 years, leaving Haruki utterly baffled. Haruki stares in disbelief as the absurd truth settles in, and he realizes the Demon Lord is somehow a plant. Ruud says that wherever the Demon Lord goes, the land turns barren and ruined, and even the local monsters grow stronger, while Haruki blurts out that the whole thing sounds insane. Trying to make sense of it, Haruki catches on the phrase instant death magic and wonders how a bizarre plant could wield something that overwhelming. Haruki hurriedly checks the abilities available to him and realizes he has exactly the kind of power he needs. As he focuses on perfect counter, Haruki becomes convinced this ability is the key. Haruki reasons that if the Demon Lord's instant death magic gets reflected the same way as Ruud's attack, then he would survive and the attack would strike the Demon Lord instead, which might stop it. Fired up by that breakthrough, Haruki declares that the hero is the natural counter to the Demon Lord. Haruki steadies himself and admits he has finally found a possible way to defeat the Demon Lord, though he still needs to investigate because it may depend on other conditions. Ruud yanks the conversation back to reality by warning that the world will be destroyed unless they defeat the Demon Lord, and Haruki is left wondering why he is forcing himself through all this. Ruud says that if they fail, it will basically mean the end of the world, leaving Haruki to absorb the crushing weight of that truth. As Haruki pictures ordinary families living peaceful lives, he realizes there must be many good people in this world. The spell changes her condition in an unexpected way. Haruki thinks that if this world is destroyed, he might never be able to go home, and he reluctantly accepts that he may have to defeat the Demon Lord. He admits to himself that having a reason to fight makes it easier to find motivation, but he still wishes even one of his classmates, especially the princess, were here. Ruud apologizes and says Haruki was dragged into a problem that truly belongs to this world. Haruki says he will put in a good word for Ruud so he gets treated properly. With a sly motion, Ruud says he appreciates Haruki helping them out, but something in his tone makes the moment feel off. Haruki falls silent, then abruptly says he is thirsty, clearly trying to escape the uneasy exchange. Ruud says he is going to get a drink and heads off, while Haruki stays behind alone with his thoughts. Haruki watches Ruud leave and reflects that Ruud's profile had shown only the part he was ordered to play. As he opens his status skill again, Haruki realizes it had said nothing about what Ruud personally felt. Thinking back on it, Haruki quietly checks Ruud's People Primer entry once more. From above, he sees Ruud heading towards someone below, and his suspicion sharpens. Ruud casually tosses Haruki a drink and tells him to drink before he passes out during training, while Haruki is caught off guard and starts wondering if Ruid may not actually be hostile after all. Haruki reads the full entry and sees that Ruid is a loyal royal guard who despises heroes and has been ordered by the princess to watch him and eliminate him if needed. Even as he drinks and admits he feels more motivated to train now, Haruki wonders what the princess is doing at this very moment. His thoughts drift to Alicia, and the scene shifts to her investigation as the tension quietly follows. Alicia tears through the records in frustration and realizes that none of the documents mention the compensation matter at all. In a flash of anger, Alicia blames that monster for everything and vents her frustration violently. Alicia suddenly freezes among the stacked books, visibly startled as she senses something unexpected. In a surge of furious resolve, Alicia vows that whoever is responsible will pay, and says she will make the accusation cling to him for a long time. Haruki stares ahead in silence, then forces himself to drag back his motivation and return to work. As Haruki trembles and wheezes through the brutal drills, he complains that he cannot take any more muscle pain, but Ruid coldly orders him to keep moving until sunset. Haruki drops to the ground in exhaustion, but Ruid right away orders Shinta back onto his feet. Ruid sharply demands to know who said Haruki was allowed to rest. Still on the ground, Haruki quickly points off to the side and awkwardly says it is just over there. Ruid looks confused and wary, wondering what Alicia is trying to do. Alicia cautiously peeks out from behind a wall, watching from a hidden spot. Alicia stays tense and conflicted, her expression full of unease as she keeps observing in silence. Haruki staggers near the doorway when Ruid suddenly calls out in surprise, asking why Princess Alicia is all the way out there. Alicia peeks from behind the wall and urgently waves Ruid over, calling for him to come there. Haruki looks confused and uneasy as he tries to make sense of what is happening. Alicia quietly wonders what they are talking about, while Ruid tells her to wait and says he will explain later. Ruid abruptly calls for Shinta and orders him to come over at once, leaving Alicia startled by the sudden shout. Haruki approaches them and awkwardly asks whether something is wrong as he finds Ruid and Alicia together at the doorway. With a strained smile, Ruid insists that training is over for the day and tells Haruki to go ahead and greet the princess. Haruki bows and politely thanks them, while inwardly admitting he still has no clear idea what Ruid is aiming for. Ruid formally says it is an honor to see Princess Alicia again today, and Haruki nervously follows with a clumsy greeting. Haruki forces a bright smile and politely tells Alicia to see him tomorrow, then wishes her a good night. Alicia blushes and awkwardly tells the hero good night, wishing him well as she struggles to stay composed. Back in his room, Haruki collapses onto the room and complains that he is exhausted and just wants to sleep, but he decides he still cannot stop watching the princess after how strangely she acted. Haruki suddenly reacts when he notices movement, then realizes Alicia seems unusually restless as she paces around her room. Alicia approaches the large doors and knocks, apparently calling for someone from inside her chamber. Looking tense and uneasy, Alicia gives permission for the visitor to come in. Haruki is confused for a moment, then tenses as the door opens and someone steps into the room. The visitor appears wiping away sweat and simply thanks her, as if he arrived after exerting himself. The man says he hopes she was not waiting too long, but Alicia right away answers that he is late. He reminds her that she was the one who told him to wash up first, sounding mildly defensive. Alicia hesitates and admits that is true, but she still seems unsettled and unsure how to continue. Haruki panics as he sees the unprepared man standing close to Alicia, and he right away suspects the two have some kind of secret relationship. Alicia falls silent for a moment, as if trying to steady herself before speaking. Alicia suddenly snaps at the man for smelling of sweat and boldly entering her personal room in such an improper state. Haruki relaxes in relief and realizes he had completely misread the situation, just as a knock at his own door cuts him off. A maid enters Haruki's room and briskly orders him to hurry up and give his report, forcing his attention back to the task. As Haruki starts with his first skill and explains that it lets him see people's profiles, Alicia listens from across the room while he speaks from the room. Haruki calmly adds that People Primer can probably be set aside for now, treating it as the least urgent of his abilities. The discussion shifts to his counterskill, and the man explains that this ability is the real problem. He warns that the skill reflects any attack aimed at the hero straight back at the attacker and seems to almost completely negate any injuries as well. Alicia grows serious and concludes that this skill could cause the greatest trouble, so it will need a thorough investigation. As the maid leaves and the room settles, he moves on and says the final skill is next, while Alicia listens from across the room. Haruki explains that the last ability is Divine Blessing, and adds that it does not affect him directly but instead affects the one who summoned him, leaving Alicia visibly shaken. The guard asks whether that means anything to her, but Alicia quickly denies it while he only gives a restrained acknowledgement. Alicia coughs, then says it is still too early to judge and insists they need to keep questioning Haruki before deciding whether he is lying. The guard then says he was actually hoping Alicia could help him with this matter, catching her attention. Alicia says she wants him to meet Haruki every day and spend as much time with him as possible, and the guard asks why. He bluntly suggests that Haruki may have become fixated on her at first sight. Alicia right away recoils in shock and repeats the idea in disbelief. In outrage, Alicia shoves aside the books on her desk and declares that she knew Otherworlders were trouble, demanding to know what kind of foolish legend this is supposed to be. Shaken with disgust, Alicia harshly concludes that heroes are nothing more than monsters capable of speaking human language. Ruud studies her reaction and says that from what he has seen, he has to question whether that claim is really true. Looking down at Alicia, Ruud says that Shinta, or rather their current hero, is still just a child mentally and physically, and he honestly does not think the boy is capable of doing anything so calculated. Alicia flares up at Ruud in disbelief, but quickly reins herself in and apologizes, saying that was not how she meant it. Ruud asks her to imagine suddenly gaining a power beyond what any normal person could have and says anyone would want to show it off, adding that those heroes were ordinary people at first and only changed after realizing how strong they had become. Alicia admits that nothing he said was in the history she was taught as a princess, and after realizing she almost put him in danger by guessing badly despite his position as captain of the Royal Guard, she quietly acknowledges her own naivety. Back in his room, Haruki reflects on the conversation and bitterly realizes that the one person who seemed to understand his side is gone. As the door creaks, Haruki slumps back and complains that there goes the only guy who had understood his side of things. Haruki erupts in frustration and demands to know why those other heroes were treated like trash, arguing that they were summoned from another world, forced to train and fight, and made to risk their lives, so of course anyone would be furious, but he still cannot accept them doing something that cruel. Then his skill window flashes before him and, as he stares in shock, he falters and repeats the word despite, as if a sudden realization has struck him. Haruki right away rejects the thought, insisting he never meant to do that to a civilian, while Alicia coldly declares that she only gave the woman what she deserved. Haruki insists that if they really have a way to restrain his power, they should just do it, while wondering why they would hide anything more effective from him. Then he falters as he hears the sealed power is not considered much of a threat yet, and he starts to wonder what this is really about. Ruud confirms that what they mean is the method for controlling Haruki by sealing his skills once more. Alicia states that 7 of his 10 skills are still sealed, and unless those seals are lifted, he will never be able to use them. Startled, Haruki blurts out whether a skill can really be sealed again after it has already been unsealed once. Alicia answers without hesitation that it can, adding that they have already finished researching that point. Haruki recoils at the implication and hurriedly asks what they mean by sealing them again, because he had assumed the rest stayed locked only because he had not learned them yet. As panic creeps in, his interface suddenly appears and announces that the archive has been updated, making him fear he has made a terrible mistake. Seeing the prompt asking whether to open the updated archive, Haruki reaches for yes while still confused about what this so-called archive even is. The archive reveals a new entry called the Princess's Heartlock, explaining that at the moment of summoning he locked a skill tied to Princess Alicia, and Haruki brightens as he realizes he may have found the key to unsealing it. Haruki snaps in frustration as the archive shuts him out, and the notice states that he has not fulfilled the conditions required to view the entry. Trying to steady himself, Haruki curses under his breath and tells himself to slow down. He stares at the archive entry for the Princess's Heartlock and realizes it says he locked a skill connected to Princess Alicia at the time of summoning, though he still cannot grasp what that actually means. Alicia confidently explains that his skills are already under her control and that it will not be long before she controls the rest of the situation too. As he pushes open the door, Haruki convinces himself Alicia is right and decides that if they are both going to come out of this alive, he has only one move left. Facing Alicia under the moonlight, Haruki declares that he will use his skills, while Alicia answers with chilling confidence that she intends to control every part of the situation. Haruki pauses to assess the result, noting that the visual change is extreme and that the situation has suddenly turned deeply uncomfortable. In the bedroom, Haruki decides this outcome is far from ideal and thinks it should have looked a lot more normal than this. Alicia turns toward him and coolly asks whether he wished to speak with her, addressing him as the hero. The next moment twists sharply as Alicia ends up sprawled across the room, leaving the air taut and dangerous. The tension only deepens as someone calmly tells the other person not to worry and to just relax. The reassurance continues as the speaker insists there is nothing to fear, even as the situation grows even more unsettling. Haruki realizes Alicia has come back to herself, and her tone suggests this has all been building toward something and that the pieces are finally locking together. At mealtime, the scene shifts as Haruki focuses on eating while desperately trying to make sense of everything. Alicia concludes that it all makes sense now, and Haruki listens in silence as the final pieces click into place. Alicia explains that 7 of Haruki's skills are still sealed and that he cannot use them unless she removes the seal, adding that the strange situation finally makes sense to her. While eating stiffly, Haruki thinks it is absurd that a hero's skills would turn out like this, and even the mood around him seems warped by how bizarre it sounds. Frustrated, Haruki demands to know who exactly he is supposed to thank for this, admitting he understands the explanation but still cannot swallow it. The narration reflects that even the heroes who once defeated the Demon Lord caused no shortage of trouble behind the scenes. The thought continues with a warning that when an ordinary person gains power beyond their wildest dreams, disaster can come fast. Alicia adds that even so, she understands why he feels the need to be careful. Haruki panics as he realizes leaving 2/3 of his skills sealed is far too dangerous, and he anxiously wonders how anyone could choose what to lock away without even knowing what those abilities do. Trying to calm himself, Haruki reasons that maybe they simply sealed the lower-ranked skills first. Sitting in silence, Haruki bitterly thinks that if the final sealed skill turns out to be nothing but an experience boost, someone is going to answer for it. As he heads out, Haruki admits to himself that he really needs to improve his conditioning. At the training grounds, Ruid keeps the pressure on with repeated practice swings while Alicia arrives and watches from the side. Alicia greets Haruki directly, addressing him as the hero. Haruki respectfully greets Alicia as princess and asks whether her own training is going well. Haruki awkwardly admits that his whole body hurts, but insists he is still giving it everything he has. Haruki reflects that he will never handle a sword as well as Ruid, and thinks it would be a much better use of his time to master more of his hero skills, if only he could access them. Haruki asks how the previous heroes unlocked more of their skills. Alicia asks whether he objects to the training, and Haruki quickly denies it. Alicia explains that the royal records say those skills were gained through steady training, and she warmly urges him to keep at it because everyone is cheering him on. Alicia shyly asks him to stop staring because it embarrasses her, while Haruki internally panics and suspects the princess is messing with him. Haruki remembers that Alicia was the one who sealed his skills and inwardly fumes over how casually she encourages him. Alicia cheerfully says that if he has an issue with the training, he should say so, but Haruki fires back that she had him dragged to this country by force and should not expect gratitude. Haruki also notices that Ruid's expression is the worst poker face he has ever seen. Alicia points out that one of his skills appears to be connected to her. And when Haruki asks what kind of skill she means, Ruid grimly realizes where this is heading. Haruki explains that one of his skills apparently grants a blessing to the person who summoned him, which should mean Alicia, though he admits he still does not fully understand it because he has not been able to test it. Alicia firmly tells him that in that case, she wants him to use that skill. Ruid is caught off guard, but Alicia insists they need to learn more about Haruki's skills if they want to save their world. Alicia calmly declares that a blessing should not be able to harm her and says she is willing to take that risk for the sake of the world. Haruki is stunned that the princess sounds completely serious and realizes she truly means it for once. Haruki thinks everything is unfolding exactly as he predicted, and he is glad he stayed up the previous night putting this plan together. Thinking back to the night before, Haruki decides he needs a quick and simple way to make them believe the summoner's blessing is real. He briefly considers claiming the transfer skill can summon some kind of barrier, then right away throws that idea out because even he would not know how to create one. Haruki wonders what sort of thing would instantly make people think of a blessing. He settles on something angelic as the most obvious image of a blessing. Haruki then realizes an angel would normally bestow blessings rather than receive one, and he thinks dressing Alicia in old Japanese-style clothes would probably feel too strange in this world. Faced with another image in his head, Haruki grows flustered and wonders how he is even supposed to describe something so strange. Haruki imagines several flashy blessing-like looks for Alicia and admits to himself that she would probably look good in almost anything, though he warns himself not to forget her awful personality. As another image crosses his mind, Haruki grows even more flustered and thinks that if anyone found out he came up with ideas like this under the excuse of testing skills, he would be done for. Looking over the quiet city, Haruki tells himself he has to take this seriously. He quickly works through the transfer settings, attaching temporary decorative equipment and a short objective in Japan, then congratulates himself on how fast his fingers moved. Back in the present, Alicia appears in the prepared outfit and calmly asks whether something is wrong, while Haruki awkwardly explains that he is just not used to these skills yet. Alicia lightly covers her mouth and reassures him that being nervous is only natural. Haruki forces a smile and thinks that if he had not planted the idea beforehand, she never would have accepted this so easily, while privately judging her to be as awful as ever. Steeling himself, Haruki formally tells her he is about to begin. Alicia closes her eyes and quietly gives him permission to proceed. In the next instant, light erupts around Alicia and the transfer activates, making her jolt in surprise as the effect begins. As the light fades, Alicia reacts in surprise, and the older man blurts out in shock at her sudden appearance and changed look. Alicia steadies herself, checks her hands and body, and says she just felt a very strange sensation. Haruki nervously explains that the skill seems to have worked by surrounding her, and admits he has never felt anything like it himself. While smiling on the surface, Haruki judges from her reaction that she only understands these skills on a shallow level and thinks he may have successfully fooled her. The older man concludes that an armor of light briefly enveloped her before vanishing, and realizes that must have been the summoner's blessing. Haruki agrees and says they can probably assume the skill is meant to protect Her Highness. Alicia places a hand to her chest and repeats that it protects her. But then her attention catches on the word effect, and she quietly questions it. Noticing the shift in her expression, the older man asks if something is wrong. Alicia quickly denies it and says it is nothing. Haruki panics internally, realizing she may have noticed the short message meant for her, and he worries she caught his wording when he wrote effect instead of blessing. Alicia hesitates in confusion, then admits she only needs one final push, and awkwardly downplays the blessing as not much of a combat skill. Haruki nervously says he simply means he cannot exactly ask Her Highness to accompany him on his journey to defeat the Demon Lord. Alicia falls silent, then remarks that if that is the case, she never expected the skill would see much use. Haruki quickly says she should not misunderstand, because he is glad the blessing can protect her if needed, but he still does not think it contributes much to the whole mission of saving the world. Alicia and the older man both fall quiet as the implication hangs heavily in the air. Alicia then says that in that case, she thinks it is time they made him fully aware. Haruki blinks in confusion and asks her pardon. With cheerful confidence, Alicia reveals that she is supposed to accompany him through much of his journey to defeat the Demon Lord, while Haruki forces out a loud, startled reaction. Haruki stares in alarm and says he is already very aware of that, while internally recoiling at the thought of spending months traveling with her. Alicia smiles brightly and declares that yes, she will be his guide for much of his journey. Haruki forces a bright response and says that is wonderful to hear, adding that he now feels filled with renewed determination. Alicia lets out a light laugh and calls out to the two men across the training ground. Time passes and night quietly falls. After collapsing onto his room in exhaustion, Haruki admits he is completely drained but relieved that he managed to trick them into believing his fake skill. Alicia checks herself in the mirror and suddenly realizes she forgot to remove her socks, leaving her briefly puzzled. The older man calls for Shinta and asks whether he is done with his morning practice swings. Haruki catches his breath and says he is almost finished, and the older man praises the effort. The man steps closer and hands Haruki something, simply telling him it is for him. Haruki stares at the item in confusion and asks what the hell it is. The man explains that it is a steamed bun popular in town, says they are all the rage lately, mentions he stood in line for an hour to get them, and adds that he even brought one for Laurent too. Haruki stares at the crowd around the shop in disbelief and realizes the older man really did wait in line for these buns. Startled, the older man suddenly remembers the commander pushed back this morning's presentation because of the buns, then explains that urgent business came up at noon and Haruki should continue with 100 practice swings for now. The older man urges Haruki to eat, insists the bun is surprisingly good, and admits he got completely swept up in the craze. Haruki takes a bite in silence while inwardly grumbling that he hates these people. The older man watches him closely and presses for a verdict, already convinced it is good. Haruki hesitates for a beat, then blurts out in shock that it is incredibly delicious. As Haruki studies the bun, he describes the filling as soft and rich, says the taste is unlike anything back home, and admits the whole thing feels like a new experience worth lining up for. Haruki awkwardly adds that the bun also looks appealing, then nervously suggests that some people would probably like it for that reason too. Chewing casually, the older man says the women in their brigade love these buns and adds that the skewers at the stall next door are just as good. Sitting against the wall with the bun in hand, Haruki says that sounds nice, and the older man catches the shift in his mood and asks if something is wrong. Haruki brushes it off and says it is nothing serious, explaining that ever since he arrived he has been stuck inside the castle doing training. The older man asks what he means and wonders if Haruki is getting a little stressed from it all. Haruki agrees and admits that is probably exactly it. Flexing with confidence, the older man insists all the exercise Haruki has been doing should be enough to keep stress under control. After mulling it over, the older man suggests they may need to raise the intensity of Haruki's training sets. Before that can go any further, he notices someone approaching and identifies her as Princess Alicia. Princess Alicia steps forward calmly and offers Haruki a polite good day, addressing him as the hero. Haruki respectfully greets her in return, says he is honored she came to see him again, and adds that her timing could not be better. The older man excitedly offers Princess Alicia one of the buns he bought in town, but she politely declines for now and thanks him, while Haruki inwardly assumes she is only here because she wants to see him. The older man suddenly complains that he feels overwhelmed, while a companion right away calls him out for saying that, and Princess Alicia reacts awkwardly as he fusses distractingly with a pair of odd creatures. The older man suddenly remembers he has some sidetracked work to deal with, and says Rude can try doing it here in the castle, then turns away with a quick acknowledgement. With abrupt enthusiasm, the older man declares they should begin and insists that another 200 practice swings ought to help for now, while Haruki hesitates and admits he is not so sure about that. Night falls and the scene shifts beneath a bright moon drifting behind clouds. Later, Haruki reflects that he has survived another day of crushing stress and decides it is time to act in secret again. Looking at the sleeping princess, Haruki says he will once again ask for her assistance, addressing her respectfully, even as the moment turns deeply uncomfortable. Haruki brings up his third skill, Otherworld Transfer, and focuses on using it to prepare what he has in mind. With a sharp grin, Haruki says he will reuse what worked last time and add a few new tools, making his intentions feel even more troubling. One item appears as a dream-inducing eye mask that clouds the target's thoughts around the hero, causes severe humiliation, and also weakens physical strength. Another item is introduced as a hairpin that changes color and vanishes when removed, while also making the target obsessively fixate on the hero in a way that turns the situation disturbingly personal. As the princess lies on the room, Haruki declares that he has crafted 2 brand new tools for his assistant to endure, and the atmosphere turns dangerously uncomfortable. Haruki decides that this time he will set everything up properly so there will be no unexpected interruptions. Seeing the princess lying there and noticing something off, Haruki realizes she is not responding and worries that forgetting an important step will only make his stress worse. The princess shifts on the room and turns slightly, making Haruki focus even harder on her condition. With a tense grin, Haruki says all that remains is leaving a message before activating his skill. The displayed conditions explain that bringing in a target from the summoning process will briefly halt the ritual, and Haruki decides to leave her there for 30 minutes to an hour until the effect fully settles. Sitting back on the room, Haruki says they should first see whether the intended effect appears, hoping her dream about him lasts through the night. As he watches, the princess reacts in discomfort, and Haruki admits he cannot tell for sure what he is seeing just by observing her. Haruki says he will need the princess herself to explain what happened, addressing her with unsettling calm. A notice appears stating that access to the princess's heart has been temporarily unlocked, and Haruki reacts with eager surprise at the useful result. Haruki right away seizes the chance without hesitation and activates the next step. A notice explains that the princess's heart lock was placed on the hero's skills during the summoning ritual, that her acceptance temporarily unlocks them, and that her rejection seals them again, leaving Haruki stunned that he can finally read this entry. Haruki says the result is exactly what he expected, though he notes with concern that the unlock being temporary could matter later. Looking at the princess's distressed state, Haruki concludes that her rejection of him reflects her current feelings, and he dryly hopes she is at least having calm dreams. Haruki realizes this must be the new skill he sensed earlier and guesses it became available because her heart lock was loosened. He reaches for the screen and decides to check what the newly revealed skill actually does. The next panel identifies the fourth skill as leveling, explaining that real-world training and combat are converted into numerical experience that raises his level and improves his performance and abilities, while Haruki mutters that the name says it all. Haruki quickly realizes this likely means the summoning was built to work this way from the beginning, and he is relieved that all his training under Ruid was not meaningless after all. As the image of a broken heart lock appears, Haruki concludes that this must represent the princess unconsciously unlocking the seal on his abilities. The realization slams into him, and he thinks this discovery might finally become his road back home. He right away jumps to a dangerous conclusion, deciding he needs to make the princess openly trust him so he can keep using the unlock. Haruki stares ahead and convinces himself this is the right thing to do. As Alicia lies in distress, Haruki decides to continue their secret routine, pressing further despite her condition. He frames this as only the beginning of something important, showing just how far his resolve has hardened. Haruki looks at Alicia and concludes that the two of them will be spending many nights dealing with this from now on. The scene abruptly cuts away, signaling the end of that deeply uncomfortable moment. Morning comes, and Alicia sits up on the room in shaken silence, still flustered and struggling to process what happened. A system notice explains that summoning cost is taken from the summoner, but compensation depends on the hero's state, and that interference with another hero can temporarily break the skill seal tied to the summoner. Overwhelmed with humiliation and frustration, Alicia can only think that this is the worst. At the training grounds, a sharp command orders Haruki to take up stance 8. Haruki right away obeys, raising his wooden sword into position as Ruid oversees the drill, and another trainee mirrors the form. Haruki steadies his wooden sword and tells himself that everything must go exactly as planned. As he trains, Haruki recalls that Alicia sealed his skills, that he can only reclaim them by unlocking her heart lock, and that the previous night briefly opened it and restored his fourth skill, convincing him that winning her trust may be his path back. While Ruid orders him into stance 9, Haruki swings and decides he must keep affecting Alicia every night with his dream-related skill without letting suspicion fall on him. Haruki hardens his expression and thinks it would be easy to paint Alicia as cruel. But after watching her, he admits Alicia actually seems more like a pure and upright woman, and he worries that if he keeps appearing in her dreams night after night, she may grow suspicious and try to stop him. He snaps his blade through another practice motion, keeping his focus outward while his thoughts race beneath the surface. Haruki reminds himself that everything he does from here on must be carefully planned. As he moves again, he warns himself there is absolutely no room for arrogance. Tightening his grip, Haruki accepts that his life is on the line. He resolves to leave nothing behind that could lead back to him, not even the smallest clue that might make Alicia suspicious. Haruki wipes away the sweat and reminds himself that he must handle everything with the utmost caution. As the castle looms in the distance, his thoughts shift as he prepares to move past that conclusion. He reflects that others might wonder why he plans to visit the princess again that night, while the atmosphere in his memory turns tense and troubling. He coldly answers that question himself, deciding that impulse is simple and instinctive, even as the recollection remains deeply uncomfortable. Back in training, Haruki pushes through brutal floor exercises beside the other trainees, forcing his body through every repetition. The spell changes her condition in an unexpected way. A trainee notices his energy and remarks that Shinta seems far more motivated than usual these days. Haruki quickly claims he needs to become stronger to help Her Highness, and then hastily reframes it as a duty to save the world, earning enthusiastic praise for his spirit. Hiding his true intent behind a faint smile, Haruki internally decides that the bait has been completely taken. As a panel-like emblem appears before him, Haruki attributes the result to his leveling skill. Haruki realizes that this skill lets every bit of training right away build into levels, with visible growth in his strength, speed, close combat, and sword attributes. Staring at the status display in shock, Haruki watches the values before him and reacts with stunned excitement as the results sink in. Seeing such clear progress, Haruki tells himself that real gains alone are enough to drive him even harder. As a meal is set before him, the scene slows and Haruki shifts from training thoughts into quiet reflection. While eating, Haruki concludes that the giant increase he mentioned earlier is not actually coming from his fourth skill. He identifies the real source as the power hidden in his third skill, while a nearby girl trembles in visible distress. Haruki compares that third skill to a legendary notebook whose written commands always come true, then concludes that this magical ability can do almost anything and is so overwhelming that it feels like it should be forbidden. He briefly wonders if he could use that power to force someone into obedience, but right away recognizes how dangerous and wrong that line of thinking is. Haruki shuts the thought down and decides to stop thinking about it for now. A new idea suddenly strikes him, and he wonders if he could simply create someone resistant to instant death magic and hand that person over to the commander. Haruki panics and begs himself to wait, realizing that as long as the princess remains around, being exposed would ruin everything and make him unnecessary. He suddenly freezes as another thought cuts in and urges him to hold on for a second. Haruki realizes that if he can create weapons capable of defeating the Demon Lord, he could save the world and solve everything without even fighting himself. The spell changes her condition in an unexpected way. His frustration turns toward the princess, and he bitterly decides that if this works, he will not need to keep training under her pressure anymore. Clenching his fist while the girl trembles nearby, Haruki angrily resolves that if he can make it happen without her, then he will do exactly that. As another man apologizes for dragging him into the situation, Haruki admits he cannot wait to leave this world behind. Sitting at the table, Haruki thinks that if he is going back to Japan after all, he might as well leave behind some kind of parting gift. Elsewhere, the princess quietly reads alone in a vast library, unaware of what Haruki is deciding. Haruki's thoughts turn hostile toward the princess, and he imagines using his power to condemn her to severe humiliation and suffering, making clear how dangerously dark his anger is becoming. Haruki notices the princess has been spending far more time in the library lately, and that instantly grabs his attention. As she quietly handles a book nearby, Haruki rises, hoping she might finally reveal a clue that could help him. Watching her in the library, Haruki finds himself wishing he could hear her thoughts and learn what has truly been weighing on her. Then he catches the slightest movement from her side, and the air suddenly turns painfully tense. Haruki pauses and scans the room, wondering if someone else might be there with her. A moment later, he decides that does not seem to be the case. The princess, clearly distressed, thinks the entire situation feels awful. She reflects that ever since summoning that person, she has been haunted by terrible dreams and the unnerving sense that something inside her has gone wrong. Hearing that, Haruki stiffens when she refers to him so coldly and angrily wonders if she means him. As the princess lets out a strained breath and fidgets nervously, Haruki notices just how strange and deeply unsettled her behavior has become. Then Haruki suddenly realizes what is happening, and the insight hits him like a jolt. In the library, the princess trembles in distress and feels overwhelmed, thinking the room is becoming unbearably heavy and suffocating. Shaken and sweating, she blames everything on the disturbing dreams and thinks this whole situation is unbearable. Haruki right away understands, realizing her strange agitation began the instant she started thinking about those dreams. He concludes that the dreams involve him intruding into her thoughts, leaving her deeply shaken whenever she thinks of him. As her breathing turns shaky, Haruki realizes she is now reliving every painful detail of those dreams. He understands that no matter how much she hates him, the stronger her resentment grows, the more the reaction spirals out of control. Seeing that she is being shaken by someone she despises, Haruki realizes the discovery must be crushing her pride. Haruki admits to himself that, considering everything, this outcome is actually working out very well for him. Still shaken and distressed, the princess thinks the situation is awful and resolves that she is going to destroy that person. Haruki realizes this development strikes the exact weak point in the situation, and the thought right away feels dangerously useful. The princess, shaken, struggles to compose herself and insists she needs to get a grip before she completely breaks down. Haruki quietly mocks the situation in his head, saying he really ought to help her by finding out what is supposedly best for her. Then Haruki suddenly freezes as a chilling thought cuts through his mind. He right away rejects the idea of completely breaking her through repeated mental pressure just to unlock the rest of his skills, admitting that would be too cruel. Even so, Haruki admits he is now strangely looking forward to seeing her again, since every encounter will push things further whether she wants it or not. Alarmed by his own thinking, Haruki hastily reins himself in and mentally orders himself to stop before he goes too far. He awkwardly concedes to himself that the conclusion does make a certain kind of sense. The princess, still shaken in the library, worries that her hairpin may be affected by magic, yet decides she has no choice but to keep moving forward with this. Lowering her gaze in embarrassed silence, the princess remains tense and quietly overwhelmed by what she is feeling. Someone slips out through the door, and a beat later a dull knock sounds from outside. Haruki straightens up with a composed smile and realizes the princess had come all this way to dine with him. Watching her recent behavior, Haruki judges that she is reacting exactly as he expected. He realizes she must have read the message from the dreams along with everything else connected to them. Haruki notes that the line claiming her feelings had changed because of his skills had completely convinced her. He is stunned to realize she never noticed he had been watching the entire time. As he shifts in place, Haruki concludes she must have suffered badly through the whole ordeal. A maid enters politely, excuses herself, and says she has come to collect the dirty dishes. Haruki right away thanks her and offers to help, while privately thinking the timing could not be worse. Left shaken, the princess can only wonder why this is happening and mutter that the whole thing feels unbearable. Holding a plate, Haruki pauses and reflects that this must be what she had meant earlier. Alicia, mortified by the misunderstanding, says it would be better if he stopped calling her Your Highness because his words are making the situation unbearable, then blurts out that she had been inappropriately fixated on him and inwardly curses him for causing this. As the maid stands by, Haruki politely thanks her. Red-faced and furious with herself, Alicia swears that she is going to destroy the thing behind all of this with her own hands. Haruki beams and says he has never enjoyed himself this much, and Alicia angrily tells him to just wait and see.